Hello and welcome to the Sub Pop Podcast. I'm Arwen Nix, and today I'm here with Chris Jacobs. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Arwen. How's it going?
Good. Chris is my boss, everybody. Chris, you're here to talk about Obits.
Okay. I like to talk about Obits. Not about the band Obits.
Not about like Obits, but about the band Obits.
Yeah, about the band Obits.
So how did you first come across this band?
In probably 2007, I was on an email list on which some people were discussing at the time, new band that Rick Froberg was in. And I'm a great Rick Froberg fan from way back.
Okay, so you were this guy's fan, and you heard that he was in a new project.
Yes, and that they had played a show at the Cake Shop in New York. And somebody on this email list that I was on was asking if anybody else on the list had gone to the show, and if they had, what they thought of it. I don't live in New York, so I did not go to the show, but this came as very exciting news to me. So I emailed this person who had said something about the show and found out that, he has a band, or he had a band at the time called Obits, which led to me then tracking him down through his wife at the time, who I knew, just kind of like sight unseen or band unheard, was like, hey, you should put out a record or records on Sub Pop.
Are you kidding me?
No. that's what I got. I was a big, I am.
That's how it happens,
yeah.
People. If you were wondering how you get signed to Sub Pop. So Chris signs the Obits to Sub Pop. And then over the years, he ends up becoming really close to one of the members of the band, this guy Sohrab. So when I was heading out to New York earlier this year, one of the people that Chris suggested I talk to was Sohrab. And one of the things he suggested I ask him about was this collection of videos that he had, videotapes from the early 80s from these punk shows in DC that Sohrab filmed when he was a teenager. These tapes that were untouched for decades and then rediscovered by a documentary filmmaker and then used by another documentary filmmaker. And then they ended up in the hands of Dave Grohl while he was working on the Sonic Highways thing. And then they ended up finding their forever home at the DC Public Library. So when I was out in New York, I went to Sohrab's house to ask him about it and some other stuff.
Call in progress. Door open.
Sorry, I'm late.
No, it's fine. Yeah. I work from home. So.
Okay. What's a job that you think you would be really terrible at?
Maybe being a lawyer?
Why?
Because I always want to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I feel like lawyers want to adhere to the structure as opposed to like the circumstance.
Seems like you'd be a very good juror, though.
I was a juror once.
When? What was the case?
It was two kids who were convicted of beating and robbing a drug dealer. It was crazy. They also, for evidence, they literally brought out a pillowcase-sized bag filled with crack cocaine, which I had never seen crack, nor had I smelled it, but the smell was nuts. It was like so chemically, and it was wild. They were like, exhibit, 13C or whatever, and it was like a giant rifle and then like a gun and all this stuff. It was pretty wild.
So I want to talk to you about all of these videotapes that you have from DC and from the music scene there. But my first question is, where did you get this video camera?
My mom bought it for me. So her grandmother, my great-grandmother, died and left some small sum of money. And have no idea why. I mean, I literally have no idea why.
Hello?
Hi, this is Arwen from Sub Pop.
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. My husband said it was Nick's barber. Yes, how are you this morning? Well, in fact, it was a phase of our life when he was doing, his music, and I was creating some English language videotapes for teaching English to non-speaking English adults.
And that was right when the high school band that I was in, we just didn't know how you get a show. I mean, we would go see touring bands, but we're like, I don't know how it just seemed impossible.
Yeah.
So the only thing that we could figure out was like, we'll rent out the local community center. And so my mom would be the sponsor of these shows. So she would like sign the paperwork or whatever. And
Sounds like a cool mom.
oh, she's great. She's great.
So what was it like for you to be the chaperone at all these punk shows with all these teenagers?
Well, it was funny. I did have different reactions. What I remember is these kids who were dressed up and they had their chains and their safety pins, and they were trying to look tough. And they convinced me sometimes. I mean, some of these guys were not little kids, but they were, men in black wearing chains. And so I was a little bit intimidated by some of them sometimes. And I had to kind of be the adult in the room, and there were rules such as no smoking. And I was very intimidated by these fellows to go up to them and say, I'm sorry, no smoking allowed, could you please go outside? And I was expecting some sort of rebellion. And in fact, they said, okay. So, it was, I mean, they were really, all of them, nice people, just dressed up like these ghoulish guys.
She would do that, and we'd put on these shows. And I think for her, it was like, oh, well, you can videotape these shows. And
did you like the music?
Not so much.
Not
so
for
much.
you?
Well, I like all kinds of music, but I wasn't, it was so loud.
And I guess it was just because there was nothing else to do with this stupid camera. We were like, all right, so we started. I mean, I never watched the tapes. We just videotaped. I mean, and we're 15, so half the tapes are the band, and then you turn it, and like it's some kid you go to high school with, and it goes back to the band. I mean, it's definitely it's super amateur, but kind of charming for that, I suppose. It's not like I was going to sell it. It wasn't like that episode of What's Happening where they bootleg the show or whatever.
So you didn't have an idea or like a mission statement for these tapes when you started
No.
recording. So then what did you end up doing with them? Because you kept them.
I did. Well, my mom, along with being great for many number of things, is she's happy to hold on to stuff. So if there's anything you want to keep, leave it. I'll get it to her. She'll hold it for you.
Marcelle, Marcelle, and the last name is Habibion, H-A-B as in boy, I-B-I-O-N as in Nancy, Habibion.
And so, yeah, they were in a box at my parents' house. And then this guy, James Schneider, started to work on a movie about the DC punk scene.
We all grew up in DC, so I knew Sohrab from high school days, back when he was in Edsel.
Years later, someone asked Sohrab for those tapes to use in a documentary, and he told me that he sent this man, James, to you to get them. Do you remember that happening?
Yes, and I think James was the one that I arranged with him. I think that he was in D.C., and I actually lived in Virginia in the place where Sohrab had been living when he made the tapes. So I took the tapes into my workplace in D.C., and he came and picked them up there.
I believe she worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs. You'd have to look that up.
They had to come to my workplace. They
Yeah.
didn't actually go into the building beyond the lobby area.
He was curious to go down there, especially since it was not long after 9/11, actually, I think.
And fortunately, it was before 9/11.
So how many years went by before you saw this footage that you didn't even remember you had?
Let's see, that was easily 25 years.
So what was it like when you did see it?
Some of the shows came back so vividly, and I really remember the atmosphere of the room of particular shows. And there were some, like the really early ones, where it's just at the community center, and I get to see all these kids that I went to high school with, people who I had not thought about in a really, really long time. That's kind of fun. And there's also definitely captures the 1985 hair and clothing choices pretty great. And there's a kid in a bandana in one of them that is just outrageously good. Because I think he's shirtless, but he's got a bandana on. It's really...
So what are you doing with the tapes now?
I have been... I was lucky enough that they were digitized for me. Dave Grohl was very kind, and because he is from the DC area, and he was in some of those early bands, and there was that HBO show,
Sonic Highways.
Yes, and there was an episode for DC, and they wanted to know if they could use some of my stuff, and I said absolutely, but the videotapes had only ever been digitized in piecemeal by whoever wanted to use whatever section they wanted to use. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I don't know what to do. I don't know that I have all the sections with Dave to send you. And then my friend Scott, who made the Salad Days DC punk documentary, he was like, why don't you ask them if they would just digitize all of them for you? They have the facility to do it. And I sheepishly sent the email like, I have stuff. Is there any way you'd be willing to, And they wrote right back. They're like, sure, here's our FedEx number. Send us the tapes. We'll digitize them to you, and, just send them back. It was really, I got to say, such a generous thing of them to do. And so the videotapes, the actual tapes themselves, are now in the DC Public Library. They have like a punk archive. So the tapes are there.
My name's Michelle Casto. I'm a special collections librarian in Washingtoniana, which is the local history department for DC Public Library.
I'm so curious as to how these conversations started, because when I think of DC punk, I don't immediately associate that with a library. So was it just a group of former punk rock librarians that were like, we gotta save this stuff, or what happened?
I mean, librarians aren't quite as square as you might imagine them to be. The library director was excited. He wasn't from here, but he knew about the DC scene because he was friends with someone who had been involved with it, that kind of thing.
It's a part of an archive with all these flyers and fanzines, and so in that context, I'm actually pretty proud. I think it's kind of neat, even though I have nothing to be proud of. I didn't do anything. I just held up a video camera, but whatever. They're in there, which is kind of exciting. But then I've been taking the digitized versions and editing out all the beginning and end of stuff where nothing's actually happening, and just posting the whole sets up on. I made a website for the shows. So I've been slowly putting them up there.
And has anyone gotten in touch with you about any of these?
Yes, a couple people. Some people who were in some of the bands, and so that was nice. And then just random people who were like, I was at that show, or there was one that somebody said, I'm younger, I wasn't around for these, but I've gotten into DC punk rock, and it's so cool to be able to see some of what these bands actually look like playing. And I was like, oh, that's cool,
Yeah.
And I will say there is no production value. This is like the shabbiest quality video, but in that way, it's actually really accurate, because these were like dark, poorly sounding rooms. You know what I mean? So it yeah, it is really.
I mean, a show at a community center should probably look like a show at a community center.
Yeah, you would not, if you wanted to replicate it, you wouldn't make it as crappy as it is, like what it actually is.
Sohrab is now in the band Savant. You can see some of the tapes from the shows he filmed online at this website he has put together, dc-85.com. Punk the Capital, the movie that James Schneider is making, should be out in the next year or so, and we've got links to his work at subpop.fm, as well as more info about the DC Punk Archive at the library. If you live in DC or are planning to visit, I recommend that you make an appointment to see it. They've got a lot of amazing stuff in there. And I'm very sorry that I assumed that the library wasn't punk as fuck. I was wrong. They have punk shows in the basement. They put out a tape. They're amazing. The Sub Pop podcast will be back in a few weeks, but in the meantime, I am going to suggest another podcast, Vanishing Inc. I've been talking to one of the makers of it recently, and I asked her to put together a quick trailer that I could play for you to see if maybe you would like it.
You may know that Sub Pop started as a zine. We over here at Vanishing Inc. are trying to recreate that in the digital space.
When you think of punk rock, you might think of this.
Well, Sheena is a punk rocker.
No powers. We're just ordinary human beings.
I once bought a Fender Rhodes piano that is haunted.
For more, go to vanishinginc.nyc or drop us a line at vanishingincnyc@gmail.com.
Okay, so they're running it like a zine. It's not your normal iTunes podcast thing. You have to go and sign up to hear it, and then there's a newsletter, and they will send you a link to the episode when it comes out. I think they're great. Let me know what you think. You can find all the music we used in the show today on Spotify. You can find us on Twitter or on Facebook or wherever. And you can find show notes from Stuart Fletcher at subpop.fm. Special thanks go to Sohrab, Marcel Habibion, James Schneider, Michelle Castro, Stuart Fletcher, Alyssa Atkins, Chris Jacobs, Megan Jasper, and of course, Jonathan Poneman. Bye, everybody.
You know, when you have a kid, you're always glad when they turn out to be a decent human being, and he is, and that's really a pleasure for me.